Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Adrian Cepak, and I look after the cloud and infrastructure team as part of the emerging tech business in ANZ. First and foremost, thank you very much for being here for the last session of the day. You know, we're the stayers, good news is it's 25 minutes approximately until cocktail hour, so appreciate you taking some time with me. What we're going to cover today are a couple of ways that you can genuinely drive significant cost savings from your existing vendor relationships to fund innovation. I had to do a similar presentation to this for Gartner a couple of weeks ago, around about the time of the IBM acquisition announcement, and I spent it was actually announced the day before, and I spent that evening, updating this presentation and making a bunch of changes and softening the messaging around, vendor lock-in and proprietary software. I ended up with this presentation that got the same themes across, but really, didn't mean a whole lot because I was trying to really softly say, that this business is different. And where I ended up was interesting. I ended up it occurred to me after many hours of changing things around that $34 billion is probably the biggest endorsement of Red Hat's business model and the open source business model driving innovation that we've ever seen. As a result, I've changed the presentation back, so it'll be. I hope it's a little bit more edgy and a little bit more controversial. But really, for me, sharing with you how Red Hat as an open source business can drive your costs down with your proprietary software vendors and open up money for funding for innovation is critically important. Everyone's been sufficiently digitally transformed, I think, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the world's biggest taxi company that doesn't own any cars, soon to be the world's biggest restaurant at the same time, or too much time talking about the world's biggest hotel chain that doesn't actually own any property. But I think we all accept that first mover advantage for innovation is one of the primary things we need. And in order to have that first mover advantage, you've got to be able to act quickly and in an agile fashion. So innovation means different things in different industries and different things to all of us, but some of the fundamentals that I think everyone agrees on are that with respect to innovation is happening in the Internet of Things, in artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's happening with web-native development, containerization, automation of everything, and software-defined everything. And some of the best examples of that innovation happening at scale are the hyperscalers. They are leveraging the open source for all of those things. They're absolutely using KVM. They're absolutely in every case using open source technology wherever they can to build an infrastructure. Even down at the hardware level, they're building purpose-built hardware based on white box systems that really does, drive costs down and make it very difficult for some of those proprietary hardware vendors. But in doing that, those organisations are absolutely becoming systems integrators and IT companies, and employing thousands of developers and people to keep those systems current, to do version-to-version control, to make sure they're secure and governed. And they have to have their own training organisations and support organisations around all that open source innovation. So as government departments, as banks, how do you achieve that same innovation from open source without becoming a systems integrator? And look, the short answer to that is you partner with Red Hat. And Red Hat gives you, all that governance, all that training, all those consulting deliverables that allow you to deliver that same open source leverage scale, but in something that's packaged up for enterprises that want to concentrate on the core business of banking or concentrate on being a better university or a better telecommunications company. At the same time, down here in the bottom corner is where, as enterprises, most of our money's tied up. In the client-server architecture, in the database, and in particular around that hypervisor. millions and millions of dollars. I've heard from many customers, and it is generally now considered an industry sentiment. They don't want to spend millions of dollars a year getting what they had before. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult because, to a certain extent, they're locked into those workloads, and they're locked into that baseline. And this is what really becomes the vicious circle of enterprise license agreement, where vendors are basically driving the agenda. So you've got a workload, a base workload that is a certain number of hypervisors, and your ELA's winding up. Okay, if you want to achieve the same discount you achieved last time, status quo, you've got to commit for 3 years. That's a starting point. So already you've lost leverage. You've lost the ability to renegotiate on an annual basis. If you want an even bigger discount, then they're going to ask you to consider things like a catalogue of products that you may or may not want, that may or may not be the most innovative, that may or may not be the best things to use in your enterprise, but you're getting this massive discount, this huge pour-in of catalogue products that you can potentially use. So it seems like a pretty reasonable proposition, and anyway, we're tied in for $1 million on our hypervisor workload, so what's 1.2? Again, unfortunately, any of those technologies you choose to adopt over that period of time then become again part of your baseline. So you have this what we call the vicious circle of enterprise license agreement, where over time your costs are going up, you're getting relatively small, comparable improvements in capability and capacity. So and the cycle goes on, 3 years' time when you then renegotiate. So with this IMS solution we have at Red Hat, we are looking at providing you with cost savings in order for you to be able to invest in some of the areas you want to invest. Now, whether that be cloud native and container-based, however you want to do that, or preferably with OpenShift, or whether that's investment in automation that can provide you significant ongoing benefits. We want to allow you to do that, but do that out of release some of this ELA spend so that you can go reinvest. And we've got a proven methodology to do this, and we're doing it with customers globally right now and unlocking this cycle. So to go in a little bit more detail about what is this IMS solution. So basically, Red Hat have automated the approach of taking what is your vSphere environment and moving it over into either Rev or over into OpenStack. And we've done this leveraging our CloudForms capability, and we literally are able to provide a push-button migration of workloads to Red Hat. Now, of course, there are some other costs associated with this. There are environmental costs, there are retraining costs, but in this solution, we've packaged all of that up so that you can see down to the absolute dollar value what it will cost you to migrate it. And because it's automated, we dramatically reduce that cost, and because it's automated, we dramatically reduce the risk of every time you want to move a migration across. So what we see over time, when we unlock some of this cost, is a very, very different model here, where you're seeing dramatic improvements in capability and only minor incremental increases in cost. Just a little bit of an interesting aside, just to break things up a little bit. We're talking about container native development and Kubernetes, and I thought this was really interesting. Of all the contribution and all the hype we're hearing around Kubernetes and Docker and all the new entrants in the market, I thought it was really interesting that Red Hat is actually, from a contribution to the Kubernetes open source environment, a second after only Google. And all of these other organizations that are claiming interesting market share are nowhere to be seen. And I'll share a couple of these sort of fun facts on open source with you as we go through. Just to take a step back to this concept of infrastructure migration and taking your existing VMware hypervisor workload and automating the approach and migrating it across to Rev. If you never decide to do that, even if you have no intention of moving some of your workloads, and your opinion is that with containerization that stuff's becoming commoditized anyway and won't matter in 3 or 4 years' time. Even if you don't want to do that, please spend half an hour with us and allow us to work through the spreadsheet with you in terms of what Red Hat can do for you in the context of the costs that you've currently got. Because this is enormous leverage for you and for your procurement department in negotiating your next ELA. There is absolutely no question that that VMware, as one of the proprietary software vendors that are driving this ELA vicious circle, there is absolutely no question that their biggest comfort zone is the fact that they don't believe you can move. And with this IMS solution, you absolutely can, and we can nail down the costs for you on what it costs to move, what it costs to retrain, and what it costs in terms of your consulting costs across the environment. So we can nail it right down to a specific dollar value. And as one example, we've got a global security company, 500 hosts, 5,000 VMs, saving 45% or 1.4 million over 3 years. The interesting thing about this, though, is after those 3 years, they no longer have those ongoing training costs. They no longer have those ongoing consulting costs. So what they're looking at is a comparable software license cost to a Red Hat subscription, which is a factor of about 1/5. So your ongoing savings so initial savings, we're talking 45%. Ongoing savings across multiple years, significantly more. An Asia Pacific airline, starting with Cathay, 240 hosts. Now this was a little bit of a smaller implementation, so it was only 500K in the first 3 years. Same applies though, and Cathay have really embraced us on the IMS solution, and they have an absolute intention of 1, automating everything with Ansible, and 2, swapping out their entire VMware environment, leveraging our Rev-based solution and leveraging CloudForms and doing that in an automated fashion. And this is ongoing activity and really well endorsed by their senior management. I won't read the slide for you, but Kelly Pierce, General Manager, presented at Red Hat Forum in Las Vegas, and presented specifically relating to this IMS value proposition, delivering value much faster, more time to do what matters. So customers are absolutely endorsing this, and we're seeing an enormous amount of interest. So the next part of this, and we're taking a little bit of a shift now from the IMS approach, is to give you a little bit of share a little bit with you about another area where we're providing considerable cost savings to our customers, and that's around automation. And upwards of 6 months ago, automation was a bit like teenage romance. I mean, everyone was talking about it, and I did say romance. Everyone was talking about it, but not a lot of people were doing it. Now, as a business at Red Hat, now our engagement with our customers around automation has just been enormous over particularly over the past 3 months. Customers engaging us around automation discoveries and working with us on workshops and coming to us and looking for consultants to come and work in their organizations. It's been enormous, and these IDC stats certainly endorse that. They're talking about 86% of organizations saying automation is either super important or mission critical. I don't know what the other 14% are doing. And 79% of those organizations looking for new tools and capabilities to deliver automation to enterprise. So this is a really interesting way of looking, and this can be applied to almost anything, but certainly to technology, and looking at Google Trends and what's really happening, because it's very impartial, right? It's just looking at what people are looking at and what people are doing out there. And interestingly, you can see the spike in Ansible around about 2015, where Red Hat bought and open sourced Ansible. Moving up into current state of play, Ansible as an automation tool, and you can compare it to any of the other competitors out there in the market, is actually eclipsing those in terms of interest uptake, and 6 or 7 times. So this is a really good weather vane, looking at Google Trends to see where what technologies are most important. This is absolutely further endorsed. 500,000 plus downloads of Ansible a month, and this is growing. I think closer to 2,000 Ansible modules. So intellectual property you can take and use in your organisation that's already up there and available as playbooks and from a network perspective as supportable devices. Again, an enormous endorsement for the adoption of automation and Ansible in enterprise. Another fun fact from an open source perspective. This one's a little bit of a different twist again. Contribution by companies to Ansible in the upstream is actually relatively small compared to what you see from independent contributors. And there are now over 2,000 developers contributing upstream to Ansible. So really interesting. Obviously, Red Hat and Ansible together up there as being the primary enterprise contributor, but really, really strong independent contribution, which is part of what's fueling that Ansible growth. Just want to give you a bit of a customer spotlight or an example. A major resources company headquartered in Western Australia started out, like many organisations do with a relatively small Ansible adoption in a couple of departments. And we worked with them on a business case for a 400 node implementation around February 2018 with an expected ROI pre-calculated of around about 5 months. That ROI ended up being less than 3, so approximately 2.5 months. So if you're looking at a $200,000 investment and you're looking at what that automation contributes back to that business in terms of cost saving, you're very quickly getting into millions of dollars. And this is absolutely and very well recognised by the customer, and they're now looking at a future of 10,000 nodes implementation of Ansible across that business for a really wide variety of functions. Just a couple of ways to get started with Ansible and automation. We have hands-on keyboard workshops that we run for dedicated customers. So we can come in and work with you and literally build out playbooks with Ansible Tower and get your team involved and leave you with some very tangible, valuable Ansible assets as part of that sort of half-day session. So we can do that hands-on keyboard work with you. We also do that to multiple customers in public Ansible sessions and are starting to scale that out across multiple offices in Australia. So there are opportunities for individuals that want to participate in that hands-on keyboard type approach to participate in these link light and light bulb workshops. We also, I mentioned before, discovery sessions. We come in and spend whatever time's required. It's often a half day or a full day discovery session where we work with people from multiple departments within your organisation to identify those high-value use cases. To go away with those high-value use cases and come back and present to you on what sort of returns you can expect from implementing those high-value use cases. And the third offer, which is also becoming quite popular, is for organisations that have already progressed. They're already convinced about the technology. They've got some ideas about where they want to go, but they want a real kickstart implementing Ansible automation in their enterprise. We've got this concept of a smart start where your consulting services and your training, everything is put together for you in a relatively easy to consume package. The intention there is, again, that we bring our consultants in and we deliver you some business outcomes based on the use cases we define. So really easy to get started with Ansible, whether you're hands-on keyboard and you want to participate in a workshop, whether you're not really sure where the value is going to come from and you want us to come in and help you with a discovery, or whether you're already convinced and you want to get started and implement with Ansible in your business. Great alternatives there to do so. So, it is only 25 minutes. The two areas that I really want to encourage you on is, if you do nothing else with this IMS solution, spend half an hour with us. Come and see anyone out at any one of the automation or hybrid cloud parts of the booths out here. We can absolutely give you some significant leverage to take to procurement to drive down your ELA costs. We can absolutely do that. Often, as part of that journey, you'll probably identify the value in taking the next step, and that is moving some of those workloads over to a much more cost-effective infrastructure like Rev or OpenStack. But at a minimum, run the numbers, and you've got them as leverage, because if we save you $500,000 on your next ELA, and you can go and implement that into an automation program, and you're able to drive a 2.5 month ROI, that $200,000 or $500,000 you save, over a year could drive, $800K or $1.5 million in value. So please talk to us about IMS and that spreadsheet. There is absolute value and absolute leverage in that. Those that are interested in Ansible, we'd love to see you at one of our Linklight or Lightbulb public sessions. We're happy to come and do these sessions for you in your own organisations for multi-departmental type implementations. And as I already mentioned, have some consulting offerings for you around Smart Start if you're already convinced. So those are the two areas I wanted to talk to you about today in terms of how you can potentially unlock some of your existing spend and reinvest in innovation. And I'll be here for the next few minutes and would love to take questions or sign you up to look at what's possible in terms of giving you some leverage. So thank you very much.